Imagine you're a priest in ancient Israel. You know the layout of the temple by heart. You have walked these courts your entire life, but there is one room you have never entered, one room no one enters, not because it is forgotten, but because of what is inside could possibly kill you. The presence of God lives there, and you are not clean enough to stand in it. Every year on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, one man crossed that threshold, the high priest. And if he did anything wrong, if he had an impure heart, if he got the procedure wrong, he died when he entered the Holy of Holies. This is not mythology. This is Leviticus 16, and every detail of it points somewhere. This week's Torah portion is called Achrei Mot. It means after the death. That name looks backward, back to Leviticus 10, where Aaron's two sons, Nadab and Abihu, offered unauthorized fire before God, and they were consumed. Leviticus 16 opens in the shadow of that event. Two men walked into God's presence without permission. And the question that hangs over everything that follows is this: can anyone come near God and live? Leviticus 16 says yes, but only through the appointed way. What follows is the most detailed ritual in the entire Torah, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. And I want to walk you through it today because every single element of this ritual points somewhere. The high priest was the most important religious figure in ancient Israel. Normally, he wore 8 ornate garments, a breastplate set with 12 precious stones, one for each tribe, a gold plate on his forehead inscribed, "Holy to the Lord." Golden bells are sewn into the hem of his robe, ringing as he moved throughout the temple. He was dressed in the glory of the nation. But on Yom Kippur, he took it all off, down to 4 pieces of plain white linen. No gold, no jewelry, no bells. In the Talmud, the rabbis noted that linen was chosen because it doesn't cause sweat. But there's a deeper detail here. White linen was also burial cloth, the same material used to wrap the dead. The high priest is basically dressing like a dead man because he is bringing life to others. Then he did something no other human being on earth could do. He walked through the veil. Yom Kippur, the 10th day of the 7th month. This was the only day, and the high priest was the only man. The Talmud records that many high priests in the Second Temple period did not survive the day. Perhaps they acquired the position by political or corrupt appointments. Those people would not fare well when stepping inside the Holy of Holies. The Mishnah says that the high priest would throw a feast for his friends when he emerged safely, because surviving was not guaranteed. I want you to feel the weight of this before we go any further. This was not ceremony, nor was it theater. This was a real man in a real room with a real God who really did kill people who came in the wrong way. And he had to go in anyway, every single year. But here's what I want you to notice. For over 1,000 years, this ritual worked. The priest went in, the scarlet thread turned white. This sign confirmed God accepted the atonement. That is, until they stopped. Before the high priest could represent the people, he had to represent himself. He slaughtered a bull as a sin offering for himself and his household. Then he took that blood and carried it behind the veil, the mercy seat, the gold lid on the Ark of the Covenant. 2 cherubim are facing each other, with their wings spread, the visible presence of God, the Shekinah, dwelling between them. Now, here's something worth pausing on. The word kaporet shares its root with Kippur, as in Yom Kippur. Both came from kapar, or to cover, to atone. The place where God's presence dwells was literally called the atonement cover.
and the blood was placed directly on it.
The atoning blood was placed at the exact intersection of God's holiness and Israel's sin. The book of Hebrews, written to Jewish believers in the first century, draws this line directly. Same structure, high priest, blood, holy place, atonement. The difference? Jesus entered the real thing, the heavenly tabernacle, with better blood, his own. He only had to do it once, not annually.
But there is a profound limitation built into the human priesthood that the book of Hebrews highlights. The mediator himself needed mediation. Every high priest in Israel had to make an offering for his own sins before he can offer for anyone else's, which means by definition, no human priest was ever clean enough to stand before God on behalf of others. He always needed someone to stand for him first.
But the blood of the bull was only half of what happened on Yom Kippur. There was also 2 goats, and what happened to the second one is one of the strangest images in the entire Torah. 2 identical goats were brought before the high priest. He cast lots over them, 1 lot for the Lord, 1 lot for Azazel. The first goat was sacrificed. Its blood was taken into the Holy of Holies. The second goat was kept alive. After the sacrifice, the high priest placed both hands on the head of the living goat and confessed out loud every sin, every rebellion, every iniquity of the entire nation of Israel, transferring it onto that animal. Then a designated man led it out of Jerusalem and into the wilderness to a remote place, and then pushed it off a cliff.
Now, what is Azazel? Scholars have debated this for centuries. It appears only 4 times in the Hebrew Bible, all in Leviticus 16. The majority of the details are coming from the Mishnah, the Talmud, and a few other commentaries. It's described as a place, a spirit, a rugged cliff, and even a fallen angel. To be clear, don't think of it as an offering to a deity, but more like a return of something unwanted.
The Mishnah, Tractate Yoma, describes it in detail. A scarlet thread was tied to the scapegoat's horns, and if they turned white as the goat fell, it was the sign from Isaiah 1:18 that God accepted the sacrifice.
2 goats, 1 atonement, 2 truths. The first goat's blood was taken into the Holy of Holies, satisfying God's holiness. The second goat carried sins away permanently, a removal. Neither alone is the full picture, and Jesus fulfills both. As the sacrifice goat, his blood was taken into the heavenly Holy of Holies. As the scapegoat, though, he bore the sins of many and carried them away. Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, not covers for a year, but takes it away.
So the blood was sprinkled, the goat was gone. But between the priest and the presence of God, there was still a wall, a very thick one. And what happened to it the day Jesus died was something no one expected. Between the holy place and the Holy of Holies hung the veil. Exodus 26 describes it in blue, purple, and scarlet yarn with cherubim woven into the fabric. The Talmud records the details, approximately 4 inches thick, made of 72 twisted strands, each strand with 24 threads. It reportedly took 300 priests to carry. This was not a decorative curtain. It was the border between the world of men and the world of God. The veil wasn't God saying, "Stay away, I don't want you." It was saying, "You're not clean enough yet." Israel's sins makes direct access fatal. God wanted them close. The sin is what made closeness impossible. And then, on the day Jesus died, Matthew 27:51,
it was torn in 2 from top to bottom, as if God opened it from the inside.
The way in, restricted for 1,000 years to one man on one day, was suddenly open. The writer of Hebrews makes the identification directly. The curtain was his flesh. The tearing was the cross. The open Holy of Holies is the presence of God, available now, not once a year, not through an intermediary, through Christ alone. I want to share something now from the Talmud that I think is one of the most striking passages in all of rabbinic literature. The Talmud records that for the last 40 years before the temple's destruction in 70 AD, 4 signs of Yom Kippur's acceptance failed to occur. 1. The scarlet thread no longer turned white. 2. The western lamp of the menorah no longer burned. 3. The lot for God no longer came up in the right hand of the priest. 4. The temple doors opened by themselves. A very bad omen.
40 years before 70 AD, that's approximately 30 AD. The rabbis who recorded this were not making a Christian argument. They were simply recording the facts that troubled them. For an entire generation, the traditional signs of divine acceptance on the holiest day of the year simply stopped working. They didn't know why.
But when you know what else happened in approximately 30 AD, you have a very good candidate for the answer. Psalms 110. Jewish scholars have long recognized it as Messianic. David writes it, but it's speaking of someone David called my Lord.
Melchizedek, he appears in Genesis 14 and then vanishes. No genealogy, no recorded birth or death, just a priest of the God Most High who received tithes from Abraham himself. And Psalm 110 declares that the coming Messiah would hold a priesthood after this ancient, mysterious order, not Levitical, not temporary, not annually.
It's forever. Every Levitical high priest had the same limitation. He was a sinner, offering on behalf of sinners. He needed to atone for himself first.
What does it mean that Jesus, as our high priest, had no sin to atone for? He didn't walk through the veil carrying the blood of bulls or goats. He walked through carrying his own blood, not because he was defiled, but because he was offering it. The priest became the sacrifice. One offering done once, and it's permanent. No fear of death, no surprise party afterwards. He had no fear of not emerging. He entered, and then he offered, and then he sat down.
But wait, the Levitical priest never sat down in the Holy of Holies. There were no chairs for him. There was, however, a mercy seat, but that was for God. But Jesus sat down. When a first century Jew heard Leviticus 16 read in the synagogue, they understood all of this. They knew the high priest was the only authorized path to God's presence, and even he needed to atone for himself first. They knew access to God was real, but restricted. The blood behind the veil, it was the appointed way. They knew the ritual was effective, but temporary. It had to be done again next year, and they knew something more permanent was anticipated. The prophet Isaiah spoke of a servant who would bear the iniquities of many, who would be led like a lamb to the slaughter, who would be pierced for our transgressions. The rabbis debated whether that servant was an individual or the nation of Israel itself. But when Leviticus 16 was read, and then Isaiah 53, and then a man walked out of Galilee claiming to be the one who takes away the sin of the world, first century Jews who knew their Torah had the framework to recognize what was happening.
And then he died. The veil was torn in two, and those who knew Leviticus 16 would have heard the theological statement immediately. The way in is open. I want to speak directly to those who are Jewish who may be watching this video with some skepticism. I understand these are not small claims, and I have to be honest about something.
After the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, the rabbis, out of genuine necessity and compassion, adapted Judaism to survive without the temple and its ceremonies. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, "Do not grieve. We have another form of atonement, acts of loving kindness."
This was a necessary response to a devastating loss, but I want to ask a question respectfully.
Leviticus 17:11 says clearly, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement by the life." If prayer replaced sacrifice, then the Torah's own mechanism of atonement has been set aside, not abandoned by God, but adapted by necessity.
The question I invite you to sit with is this: what if the temple wasn't just destroyed? What if it was fulfilled? What if the reason the scarlet thread stopped turning white 40 years before the destruction of the temple was not a tragedy? What if it was a sign?
Every Yom Kippur in synagogues around the world, the Avodah service is recited, the full Yom Kippur temple ritual, in precise detail as if performing it. The high priest movements, the incense, the lot, the blood on the mercy seat. Your tradition has preserved every detail of a ceremony you have not performed in 2,000 years. Why is that? Because the hope of its restoration has never been abandoned.
I would like to think that the Jewish people have upheld biblical traditions and practices to point back to God, not holding out for a future temple.
But as far as the temple is concerned, I believe it was restored in the person of Yeshua, 3 days after he was killed outside the city of Jerusalem. In other words, you can have that temple now. Paul said it clearly, that all believers in Yeshua became that temple where God's Spirit dwells.
You don't have to replace many of your rich traditions, but I believe he has sent me to introduce your Messiah back to you. So, do you have ears to hear it?
And if you haven't seen the companion episode, the red heifer from Shabbat Parah connects directly to what we've covered today. I'll link to it below and in the cards above. Coming up next, we follow Moses into Leviticus 25, a year of release. Debts are canceled. Slaves are free. The land is returned. It's the Jubilee. It is the passage Jesus stood up to read in Nazareth on the day he announced his public ministry.
He closed the scroll, sat down, and said, "Today, the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." That's coming up next. If you would like to watch more videos in this series, click over here. For any of our other videos, try over here.